Hey, folks. Today's program is sponsored by one of my favorite sponsors, SunsetLakeCurated.com. Seder. Sunset Lake, not only do they sponsor today's program, they also sponsored my sleep last night. One of the best things about...
raise that code a little bit.
What's that?
You raise it up a little bit higher. So
for the code. You can see the code too. One of the best things about taking the tincture to go to sleep is I always, invariably these days, wake up in the middle of the night. I don't know why. 2, 4, 5 in the morning. I will take a commensurate, smaller or bigger shot, depending on how further away my end game is, and it gets me back to sleep very quickly. That's why I love it. SunsetLakeCurated.com. 20% off with the code Left is Best. They have gummy bears. They have fudge. They have great coffee that's embedded with Seder. Embedded, brewed with what? I don't know what you call it. But that's my weekend brew. They also have smokables, pre-rolls, and stuff that you can grind up. It's a great complement to smoking other materials, right, Matt?
Smalls and the Keef give you a nice little body high boost.
There you go. I have a friend who has to take antibiotics. They can't drink. And I gave them a little present of Seder to basically smooth it out. You know how it is when you have kids. Well, you don't, but believe me. Bottom line, this is a great company. Great farming practices. They use integrated pest management, no pesticides. They use organic fertilizer, and they use regenerative farming practices in conjunction with the University of Vermont. They're also a great movement partner. They are going to help us. They've got a big thing planned, and we're trying to figure out. They're going to be donating a lot of their profits on a specific day coming up. Details to follow. But the bottom line is we work with these guys to figure out, what's a great charity to give to. They provide support for union strike funds. I mean, all of it. I'm also hoping that they will come down to the live show in Boston just to hang out. I want to meet them.
Me too.
But it's SunsetLakeCurated.com. 20% off. Left is best. Check it out right now. And speaking of now, here's the show.
Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, November 1st, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Laleh Khalili, professor of international politics at the Queen Mary University in London, author of Sinews of War and Trade, Shipping and Capitalism in the Arabian Peninsula. Also on the program today, COVID deaths top 5 million worldwide. And we, the U.S., is number one.
Number one, baby.
Over 750,000 deaths in this country. As winter is coming to Europe, and very well may come here, as it were. Meanwhile, Democrats hope to vote on both the reconciliation and bipartisan bills tomorrow, but don't hold your breath. Speaking of holding your breath, do hold your breath regarding the Virginia elections tomorrow. All polls show that they are extremely tight. There's voting all around the country. Go out and vote. At the moment, the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments in the Texas abortion ban case. And on Friday, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a case regarding the EPA and the Clean Air Act, which may completely shred our regulatory state. Been warning around these parts about a case like this under a 6-3, even a 5-4 conservative Supreme Court, and we may be there, folks. We'll talk more of that on the program. Biden is at COP26. No one expects anything. Yellen floats reconciliation to lift the debt ceiling. Remember that? That's coming back around. And University of Florida professors have been barred by the state from helping plaintiffs fighting the state, in this case Florida's, regressive voting laws. All this and more on today's Majority Report. I'll just say, Emma Vigeland, who's here, that case seems like a real First Amendment case.
Sounds like it.
I mean,
well, it sounds to me like those professors are trying to do critical voting theory.
I mean, you've got the state, literally the state, impinging upon what these professors can do in their professional capacity. In any other case, they would be allowed to do this, but because it's against the state, it's pretty, I don't know.
Somebody, if free speech is your issue, you might want to get on this.
Get on the blower.
Yeah.
Call your office.
When the dogs don't bark is always interesting.
Exactly. Meanwhile, we got a lot to talk about today. We will get to that, this case that could end up being the non-delegation case that we've been talking about for a long time on this program. This is the worst case scenario in terms of what can happen within the context of our law. I mean, arguably also the overturning of Roe v. Wade, another one, but at least in terms of Roe v. Wade, there is I wouldn't say a transparency, but there's a greater awareness, and it's a more specific situation. When we talk about the non-delegation clause, 40% of you already just fell asleep before I finished that phrase.
Right.
And then another 25% will fall asleep as I get into the first sentence of describing it.
But
and then
you're still giving us YouTube views even if you're asleep, so we don't really care.
Well, I mean, I don't really care. I mean, to be honest with you, I do care.
Yes.
Obviously, because this is the issue is just that this is going to be very tough to explain to the American public all of a sudden, like why the EPA cannot require clean air or clean water, or the FDA or the SEC. I mean, on and on and on. We'll talk more about this as we continue. In the meantime, really, the primary game in town remains the passage of the reconciliation bill and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The progressives have done a good job in holding the line, at least in saying we're not going to vote on the bipartisan bill until we vote on the reconciliation bill.
And not just a framework. We want the text. We don't want a pinky promise.
That's right.
Yeah.
It actually has to be real.
Because we already got one of those with 3.5 trillion, supposedly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
And
they have every reason to be skittish.
I'm still old enough to remember when Joe Manchin back in the early spring was talking about 4 trillion.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Kristen Sinema seems to be forgetting what she's been doing for the past couple of months and is now, and frankly, I mean, yeah, no, I think she's pretending. I'm trying to think like, what's the best way for me to articulate this? Oh, I know. She's lying. She is now claiming that she wants to bring back into paid family leave and a couple other provisions that she has really been.
I'm the good guy. Don't worry about it. Right.
Midwifing, it's their extraction from the bill. Let's put it that way. So it's a complete mess. And now everybody's trying to sort of already on their CYA tour, but we will get to all that. In the meantime, Rick Scott showed up on Fox News Sunday, did not plead the fifth, which I guess is an advance for him. He's on with Chris Wallace, and Rick Scott's all talking about like the spending and we're worried about the deficit. And then Chris Wallace asked him the most obvious of questions.
And you talk about living within your means, you talk about the debt, you talk about deficits. The Trump tax cuts, which were passed in 2017, the year before you were elected to the Senate, is estimated by the Congressional Budget Office that it is going to increase the deficit by over $2 trillion over 11 years. So should the Trump tax cuts be repealed?
My experience is I cut taxes and fees 100 times over $10 billion, and I actually balanced a budget and paid off a third of the state debt. You can do both. The way you do it is you look at every line of your budget. I think there's about 4,000 lines of the Florida budget. I went through every line and said, I am not going to waste anybody's money. We've got to do that at the federal level.
But sir,
we need lower taxes.
But sir,
and
respectfully, when Donald Trump was president, you had this tax cut, which added $2 trillion to the deficit, according to the CBO, and you didn't have the commensurate spending cuts. So the question is, if you're not going to have the spending cuts, should you repeal the tax cuts if the debt and deficit are so vital?
Well, first off, I am not raising anybody's taxes. I want lower taxes. I want to watch how we spend our money. I've been in the Senate now 2 years and 9 months. The amount of waste is staggering. Americans should be furious with the way money is spent in the Senate and in all Congress. It's your money. It's not government's money. We've got to figure out how to live within our means. I did it at the state level and actually paid off the third of the state debt. We've got to look at every line, take every line of the budget. Don't say, well, you know, that's only $1 billion. It's $1 billion. That's a lot of money.
He's ignoring the question there. And of course, you know, we know the states function differently than the federal government. And frankly, you know, I think the point of the questioning there was to show that they aren't really concerned with the deficit and the debt. And frankly, I don't think that we should have a tremendous concern for the deficit and debt at this point. They always just use it as a means in which to inhibit the government's ability to provide services for its citizens. The other thing is, guess what? It's the government's money.
Yeah, right. This is your money. He really got flummoxed there. I mean, I'm not expecting someone like Chris Wallace to engage in the kinds of questioning that we would want. It's useful to show Rick Scott's a clown, but I think as leftists should start to move away from the hypocrisy shaming element of, you know, you voted for the Trump tax cuts and this added it to the deficit, because it inflates the importance of the debt and deficit, where we might want to just circumvent that and talk about what policies we're proposing versus what the Republicans are, which is nada.
I think I agree, but I do think there is value in showing that they also, they don't even believe it.
As a supplement.
But just to be clear on this money thing, I could tear up this piece of paper. It's mine. I cannot do that with the dollar bill in my pocket. That is not legal because it's not mine. It's not mine. It's the U.S. government's.
You could, as like an act of civil
disobedience. I could.
Do a Sinead O'Connor with the dollar bill and rip it up. Right.
Well, I could physically do it. But the point being is that, no, it's not our money. The government prints the money. The government creates the value in the money. You don't accept a dollar bill from me because you think that I'm a good guy and you can trust me, you accept a dollar bill from me because you know the government will take that dollar bill in the context of taxes. And that's the one place where if you don't pay, you got to go to jail. So that's basically how the value of our dollar is created. But with all that said, that's also a secondary point. The point is Rick Scott's just full of crap. He's just full of bullshit.
He's a rich person's servant.
Exactly. And to be fair, a rich person.
Right.
A rich person serving other rich people.
All right, we're going to take a quick break.
A collective.
When we come back, we'll be talking to Laleh Khalili, professor of international politics at Queen Mary University of London, author of Sinews of War and Trade, Shipping and Capitalism in the Arabian Peninsula. Two sponsors of the program today, in addition to, of course, our movement.
Seder.
There you go.
I love saying it. Now I say it in real life. That's the only reason.
This is all real life.
Say it, well, not to me.
Emma thinks that she's like this is like a dream fugue state that she gets in during
and then
this
money
time.
just appears into my account. I don't really know how it gets there.
Do you know your closet well, Emma?
No.
Do you know what it sounds like?
Mess.
No. Well, maybe.
Okay.
But does it exude your taste? Does it scream your taste? Does it whisper your taste?
Not in the way it should, maybe.
Mine's starting to.
Wow.
Yeah.
You were showing off a snazzy number before the show today.
Yep. I got it from Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix Freestyle, it's a shop that evolves alongside your taste. Your closet is going to scream "so you" without actually screaming, of course. It's going to look that way. Introducing Stitch Fix Freestyle. It's a shop that is built just for you. Stitch Fix Freestyle is your trusted style destination where you can discover and instantly buy curated items based on your style, likes, and lifestyle. Doesn't matter if you're looking for a brand you love or you want to try a new one, Stitch Fix Freestyle. You can shop a range of over 1,000 brands personalized to your size and fit. They have styles for workouts. They have styles for workwear, lounging around the house, night out on the town. Stitch Fix Freestyle has clothes for any occasion. Plus, no subscription required. They offer free shipping and free returns and exchanges. It's a super easy process. I've been using Stitch Fix for years now. And sometimes, every now and then, I'll get one that I'm like, I don't like it. Send it back. Super easy. Very quick. Right now, I am sitting on, not literally sitting on, but I'm just about to break out. It's that season. I've been waiting to do this. My baseball style zipper cardigan, which Matt was like.
Is that what you were showing us before?
Yes.
It is nice.
Matt was very taken with that, the zipper style cardigan. You didn't even know you could do that, did you?
I'm used to the button cardigan.
Yeah, and millennials don't like that, where you got to spend all that time buttoning up.
Old technology.
Yeah, no, this is great. It's sort of like a combination sweater hoodie type of situation.
Yeah, it's like the style. It's not millennials can't use buttons. You're like hung up on that.
Well, the bottom line is I wouldn't even known it existed if it wasn't for Stitch Fix. You can get started today by filling out your style quiz at stitchfix.com/majority. That's stitchfix.com/majority to try Stitch Fix Freestyle. Go to stitchfix.com/majority. Also, you've been hearing about this in the news all over the world. Companies hit by ransomware attacks, they have their valuable digital files held hostage, and they're forced to decide whether to pay cyber criminals to get them back. Ignite is the first ever file system with sophisticated ransomware detection and recovery tools fully baked in. Behind the scenes, Ignite gives companies with limited IT and security staff, that may be you, the power of much larger teams. With Ignite, you'll know exactly where key documents are and who has access. Automatically detect more than 2,000 ransomware variants and flag unusual behaviors. There's no on-site hardware or software needed. Shut down compromised accounts and quickly identify and restore encrypted files, and you can do all of this from a single cloud-based platform. If ransomware does sneak through, you can restore your files fast and be back up and running in hours, not days. and you're not going to have to pay some exorbitant, I mean, you shouldn't have to pay any type of ransom. With Ignite, you don't need a specialized security ops team to keep up. The system is always learning and adapting to new threats. You can learn more about how Ignite can protect your business from ransomware, or see why Ignite is rated #1 for data security by real customers in G2 Crowd. Start your free trial today at Ignite, EGNYTE.com. That's EGNYTE.com, ignite.com. Check it out. All right, folks, want to welcome to the program Laleh Khalili. She's professor of international politics at Queen Mary University of London and author of Sinews of War and Trade, Shipping and Capitalism in the Arabian Peninsula. Laleh, I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, and very nice to be on your show. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
Let's start with this. I guess you wrote more or less that maritime trade and hydrocarbon transport, that would be mostly oils and maybe in various forms of that, are the clearest distillation of how global capitalism work. The book really basically goes through all the things that create this process of maritime trade and hydrocarbon transport. But why is this such a distillation of global capitalism?
I think one of the things that makes global capitalism today very distinct and perhaps different than previous periods is the global scale of capitalism today. As you know, raw materials are produced in all corners of the world. For example, ores and bauxite and various other kinds of metals that are necessary for industrial production are produced in places like Africa or even Australia. Oil is produced in the Middle East and elsewhere, and then it's produced in China, and that material that is produced, the products that are produced in China, which is today the factory of the world, are then shipped all around the world. There are some statistics that are floating about that somewhere between 82% to about 90% of the world's goods travel by sea, and that's an astonishing percentage if you think about it, because that includes both raw materials, but also produced goods. And that means that just about, if you look around you, everything that is around you, a very large percentage of that has come across the ocean in order to get to the destination that it has. I think that in some senses that makes thinking about global capitalism clearer in the sense that it shows to us that the process is transnational, that it is diffused across a whole series of different states with their own regimes of labor, with their own regulations, with their own laws, with their own currencies. But at the same time, the process is in some ways framed by or structured by sets of standards, sets of global treaties, sets of regulations that still emanate from the North Atlantic. And if you think about it, that essentially is an encapsulation of how capital works today.
And I mean, how is that different than the way it's been in the past? I mean, just to give us a little bit of a sense before we start going into some of the specifics here, like broadly speaking, was it always what elements were different? I mean, and the one that keeps sort of hanging out there for me is is the last thing you said about the imposition of the if you want to call it the sort of the North Atlantic, you want to call it the sort of the European U.S. access, or whatever you want to say, that there's that imposition on the rest of global trade. And I should say, I want to circle back because much of what's going on with China is really, it seems to me, a function of who's going to get to set those terms. But how is that different than what it's been in the past?
So I think I differ from a lot of scholars who would, for example, argue that globalization is something completely new and we haven't seen it. I mean, if you look at the transformation of the world in a kind of a much longer perspective, hundreds of years of, history, what you'll see is that there have been particular periods during which there has been a massive migration of people, goods, and capital across the seas. What I think makes this particular moment different is the scale of it. The entirety of the globe is sort of embedded in this web now. There's not a place that escapes from this sort of the sort of circulation of raw materials to produce goods to markets. It's entirely a global event now. So that's the first thing. Second, it's the density and the intensity of it. So there are really so much of what is produced in the world goes through this maritime circuit. It is there was perhaps a period where you could say that local production, or at least regional production, tended to have larger markets. But what we see today is like really the global extent of this and the density of that, as I said. But I think, as you say, and as you pointed out, I think what is really important about this is that there's a set of rules and laws and treaties and standards that have been established. And I think many of them began to be established towards the end of the 19th century, sort of during the high imperial period, and have continued to be reproduced and extended from the North Atlantic. Now, I say the North Atlantic because one of the things that's really interesting is that London, despite Brexit, and the Netherlands, for example, which we don't often think about, are incredibly, and Belgium, both as EU but also as a maritime country, are incredibly important locations for things like maritime insurance, or for maritime capital, or for maritime banking, logistics banking, or for supply chains expertise, or for port making expertise. So these kinds of older imperial nodes are quite important. But of course, the world's commodities are nowadays denominated in the dollar and in dollars, and the US, of course, dictates a lot of the rules around financing and around trade, and it tends to be able to, to strong arm the WTO and the IMF and the World Bank in ways that no other powerful country can do. And so that North Atlantic complex of countries, rules, laws, capital, regulations, etc., tends to be extremely dominant. And they even at the moment still set the parameters by which even a giant like China operates. So Chinese capital still operates according to the rules that are still established in the North Atlantic space. Now, that might change in a generation. It might even change sooner than that. But it's still, we are in that transitional period where the North Atlantic still has a kind of a grip on the way global trade, global maritime trade is done. And I think that that's something quite important to acknowledge and recognize.
If there has been this sort of fundamental change, or at least a quantitative change that has brought about a qualitative change in the way that our sort of the global capitalist system works. Who has been the losers in that in that change? Because it where there may have been, sort of more nodes of power where you could sort of usurp that process. I would imagine labor and specific countries have less of an ability to sort of interfere with what's going on. But who are the losers for that quantitative/qualitative change?
I think if you look, there are multiple scales at which you can sort of determine losers, right? Because I think if you look, for example, at, let's say, the global complexion of this global trade, you'll see that countries which are still producing raw materials, which are then lifted from their ports and transported to China or elsewhere, are perhaps not getting as much of an income or as much of a value added from the material they're producing. So to some extent, you would think that this is kind of the old imperialist thing, where the producers of the raw materials, who are also the markets for these goods or emerging markets for these goods, tend to be the losers globally. They tend to get unequal sorts of benefits from these sets of trades, asymmetric benefits from these sets of trades. They also tend to go in debt in order to produce the infrastructures that transport these raw materials to the ports. And so that process of sort of debt politics also tends to play out, not quite in the same way that it did it in the sort of the age of high empire in the 19th century, but it still does. So there are these global losers, and some of these global losers are located, some of these countries that are losing out in this sorts of sets of trade are located in places that produce goods, everything from timber to ores, as I said. So that could be in Latin America, it could be in Africa, it could be in Asia. It's essentially the tricontinents of empire, the age of empire, that still continue to be affected by these inequalities of trade. But then that's one scale at which you're looking at. And then if you look at domestically within the countries that were once sort of the global powers, you'll see in those countries, let's say the US or Britain, you'll see also the shift in sort of the capitalist production from industrial production to service production, to sort of provision of services. And I think that also produces or intensifies inequalities that were already embedded in a kind of a radical capitalist, capitalism of the last 100 and something years. So you see people who are working in the service industries, but you're also seeing deindustrialized, decimated parts of the countries. And in the US, it's the Rust Belt. In the UK, it's the Midlands and the North. And so you see those kinds of regional differences as well. But then there are also, if you look, for example, even within cities or even within regions, there are those that benefit from these global trades and there are those that don't. The metropoles often benefit, particularly if those metropoles are connected to global trade. So London benefits. New York benefits, in some ways. But within London and within New York, one of the things that's really striking is the extent to which inequality is really intense in those places as well. So what you find is that in all of these locations, you can look at multiple scales, and even within the smallest geography, within the smallest spaces, there are those who are benefiting from the intensification of global trade and capital accumulation, and there are those who are its losers, and those that are its losers are generally those who actually are producing the work, who are doing the work, whether that's the service work or whether that's the sort of the skilled work that is required in the ports or on board the ships. And those guys are not the ones who are actually the prime beneficiaries. Now, in all of these places, including in China and the global south, which have become factories of the world, you also see the emergence of a proper bourgeoisie. And also concurrent with that, you see populations that are being exploited. So Chinese cities, especially those that are on the coast, have become these incredible mega urban hubs that are, and there are, of course, millionaires and billionaires and oligarchs of all sorts, and a middle class that are beneficiaries of the development of China. But we also hear, for example, that even in Chinese hinterland, there's, of course, inequalities embedded in rural life or not being involved in industrial production. So at all scales and in all locations, what we have is these inequalities, these asymmetries that tend to be produced and reproduced in new ways and in different ways than before all the time.
What space do nations like Kuwait, the UAE, oil-rich nations occupy in this construction of global capitalism? Because right at the outset of your book, 30% of exports or what's shipped on these cargo ships are crude oil.
Tankers. Yeah.
So that's a big chunk of the global supply chain, and another, I think, interesting wrinkle to the story.
Yes, and that's a brilliant question. So oil has been incredibly important. I mean, just before 1973, just before sort of the spike in price of oil that happened because of nationalization of a lot of oil in the Middle East. Actually, what was amazing was that somewhere between 60 to 70% of the world's maritime cargo was oil. I mean, if you think about that, that is an astonishing percentage. And of course, that's a really hugely important factor in how shipping today affects, since COP26 is going on in Glasgow, how shipping affects the climate. Now, the role that countries like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Abu Dhabi specifically, and Qatar play in this new new/old modalities of trade, is that they produce the fuel that really it's the motive for the engine of global industry. It is the fuel that produces that lights our electricity. It's the fuel that fuels our transportation. But on top of that, as a colleague Adam Hanieh has recently written in the New Left Review, it's also the fuel that goes into the production of plastics. And we live in a synthetic age where a huge amount of what the plastics that we produce, and which are essentially choking our oceans and the air, and the microplastics are destroying the lived environment, that's also comes out of these hydrocarbons. So what the role of these major oil producers, particularly oil producers in the Middle East, because of their long-standing alliances with the US and the UK before that, is that they act as a kind of an intermediary for capital. They're, on the one hand, they facilitate, they lubricate the wheels of global trade. And on the other hand, the capital that they're producing is fueling investments in speculative investments in real estate and football teams and other kinds of stock markets and whatnot in Euro-America. But it also, those investments are also, as I said, that's kind of a mid-level investments, are also changing the shape of, for example, ports in the Horn of Africa, or changing the shape of, or the complexion of global trade in the immediate Indian Ocean neighborhood of some of those countries, particularly the UAE, which has got a major, it's Dubai, the Dubai World Port is, Dubai Port World is quite a significant port management company that operates in all of these different places. And so what we see is that these oil producers, on the one hand, are producing the petroleum that is the motive force of industry, continued global trade, but they're also now centers of capital accumulation, both in the peripheries, but also in the global north. And I think via their sovereign wealth funds, for example. And so I think that transformation is also something novel, something that we have not seen before. And it is quite interesting. Part of the reason why I wanted to research that.
Well, I want to get into, we'll start with, the process of route making. But as we go through these different elements of what it takes essentially to create a system of global maritime trade, which is the horse and which is the cart in this instance, in terms of maritime trade and the idea that maybe 40% of it, 30 to 40% of it is hydrocarbon? Like, which of these forces is sort of shaping this to the extent that one has more, that is leading as opposed to sort of following? Does that make sense, that question?
Yes, absolutely. Is it the production or the circulation that matters? And why is it that I focus on circulation rather than production? I think that's a really great question. I think in part because I am interested in particular historical continuities in the region that I study, which is the Middle East, between colonial times and now. And one of the things that becomes very clear when you study the Middle East is that as this incredible, historically significant node of trade, of commerce between both on its own terms, but also as this incredibly important hub that sort of connected the empire in Asia and Africa to Europe. It has always been incredibly significant as a sort of as a route, as a place through which a lot of trade traverses, but also as a place where those kinds of trades shape the existing sort of sets of social relations, political relations there. In the case of, and so what that makes me realize is the importance of maritime transportation in facilitating other kinds of economic life, which wouldn't have been possible had maritime trade not existed. It really is a kind of a chicken and egg question, in the sense that I think that had the sort of maritime innovations in transport not happened, it wouldn't have been possible to exploit the globe's natural resources, raw materials. And had those raw materials and natural resources not existed, it would have been very difficult then of what would you have shipped. And so the two processes really feed on each other. I think one of the things that for me has been particularly interesting about the role of circulation has been its transnationalism. And I think the fact that rather than, because production, particularly of raw materials, but also in fact in world factories, tends to be very grounded in nation states. That they tend to be very territorialized, literally, but also figuratively. Whereas I think maritime transportation tends to be very international, and it tends to traverse not only parts of the sea that people have claimed as part of their territories, but also these kinds of global spaces whose sovereignty has not been determined, or whose sovereignty is divisible. Lots of people claim it. And so to me, that also is fascinating, because it is circulation in this instance is absolutely central, pivotal to the process of production itself. But the conditions, the political conditions under which it happens, are distinct from the much more grounded, territorialized notions of production, which happens in specific countries and specific locations, in specific, often land-based geographies. And so I think that I hope to some extent, it's a kind of a cop-out of a response, in the sense that I'm not telling you which one is the cart and which one is the horse. I'm going with the chicken and egg metaphor, because I do think that it's impossible to separate the two of them together. Without circulation, production would have never happened. But without production, what would you circulate?
All right, fair enough. Well, let's talk about the most, I guess, circulatory of the things you look at, which is the route making. What are the implications? How are these routes made, and what are the implications in the way that they're made? I mean, I think the easiest sort of analogy that people could sort of appreciate in this country in terms of like a land-based one is, particularly in the East, we had, these routes that people would follow to drive, and things would get built up along the routes, and the motels and shops and whatnot. And then a big highway comes in and completely changes the dynamic of all of those communities on some level. To what extent do we see that in the development of routes here, and what are the implications? What do the development of these routes tell us about this system?
So I think that's a really great question. And I think the analogy to the roads is largely correct, because I think that in some ways, the development of ports and economies around those maritime routes is not too dissimilar with the sort of the upcropping of little travelers, villages, towns, cities around roads. You have maritime routes starting in one particular location, ending in another location, and in the middle, stopping in very specific locations and specific ports, transit ports. And the question then becomes, how do you decide what your destination port is? How do you decide what are the transit ports? How do you decide where you go in between point A and point B, if one is your origin and one is your destination? And I think, although there's a lot of sort of people that would use geographically deterministic kinds of arguments about that, port X is located in such and such place because it has very extremely sort of amenable geographic or topological characteristics. It has a deep harbor, or it has a good port. Actually, a lot of the reasons why ports are located and where they are tend to be much more political. So I'll give you some examples. The geopolitics of particular locations matters. The kinds of skills you can find in a particular port matters. Do you have seafarers that can help you out? Do you have ship repair that can help you out? Can you refuel in this particular port? And then, of course, there's the sort of the imperial or colonial pasts and presents. The port that you're going to, what is it close to? Who is it close to? If you go there, what does it symbolically in terms of politics indicate about your politics if your ship arrives there flying, for example, the US flag? And then who is the hinterland of these places? So all of these calculations have gone into where the ports are. One of the things that's really interesting is that so many of the places that are today significant kind of city-states, but also transit ports, but also really important nodes of maritime trade, tended to also be colonial hubs of trade for the British or the French Empire. Certainly in my space, the space that I study, that's the case with Bahrain, it's the case with Dubai, but also further afield, when you look at Singapore or you look at, for example, Hong Kong, these were crucial to the British trade in Asia. And of course, in some of these places were quite significant during the colonial times. I write about Aden in Yemen, for example. It was really important because it was a coaling station, but it had this amazing location. It was between halfway, more or less, between Asia and Europe, but it also sat on the Bab el-Mandab. It sat on this route of trade. It was close to Africa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be perfect in so many different ways. And then despite its perfect location, it really receded from that centrality once it was decolonized, because the British shifted a huge amount of their business to the Gulf or elsewhere. And so that sort of a gentle decline was then accelerated through the depredations, both of the sort of the Yemeni regime there, authoritarian Yemeni regime there before 2011, and then of course in the last few years by the Saudi and UAE's coalition war against Yemen. So you see the decline of Aden as a kind of an indication that despite its incredibly propitious location, it has receded as a significant port in the region. And Dubai, on the other hand, because it was a very good proxy and client for the British, because it has continued to be an extremely good proxy and client for the US, because it has these connections. It controls its labor force. It has a it doesn't have to have even a union. Bans unions. It has extremely favorable regulations for global trade and capital accumulation. Then Dubai, despite the fact that its actual geographic location is not fantastic, ends up becoming a very significant port of trade. So these political processes is what I was really interested in delineating. And so the comparison for me between Dubai and Aden, neither of which were major oil ports, was a good example in that sense.
And so is it a pull or a push situation? I mean, does the fact that like Dubai, there's a lot of exploitation and extraction that can take place in terms of our labor and whatnot, but we also have some, some other benefits that I mean, is it that those who are shipping are seeking out? Like, is it a pull or a push type of situation, or is that sort of change depending on the context and the day, I guess?
I think it does change depending on the context, but I think that the push and pull work together, because I think that a port providing particularly business-friendly provisions for trade, free zones in which whatever labor laws may be existing are suspended, lax regulatory regimes, etc. Those kinds of push factors are quite significant, but then the sort of the pull factors are also important. Obviously, as I said, the fact that Dubai acts as a kind of an intermediary political space for capital, where it can provide the necessary expertise for, say, for example, the Horn of Africa or for the Arab region to, let's say, Chinese investors coming in from Hong Kong, also makes it attractive in that sense. So it's both of those things are often in operation in a given moment. It's both the externals looking at a place and seeing it amenable, but also the ports themselves trying to make themselves attractive to these external investors. And of course, the very fact that Dubai itself also is a major, or Dubai Ports World is a major investor in ports in the Indian Ocean Rim, also makes Dubai itself quite a significant space for maritime transportation.
And you also talk about the sort of the development, I guess, of harbor making, and that being sort of another, I guess, both push-pull type of situation. If you have a harbor that's deep enough, if you have built docks that can support the offloading of certain types of products or shipping containers or whatever it is, that's going to attract people. But it's also, the demand is created by decisions of these of where people want their goods, I guess, going to.
I think that's a really important point. And I think one of the things that I actually started the whole research project almost 10 years ago with the question of why would Dubai be such a significant port? It appears in the top 10 list of the world ports very frequently. The list towards its bottom portion shifts a little bit. So sometimes Rotterdam is on there, Dubai isn't, and sometimes vice versa. And so the question is, Dubai does not have a huge immediate hinterland. It does have a huge hinterland if you actually consider India and Pakistan to be the hinterland for Dubai as well. But on the other hand, it's also sits on a part of the Persian Gulf, which actually, except for the channels that are dredged for a ship to come to Dubai, it's so shallow that ships can run aground, especially the sort of the mega ships that we see today. And yet it has flourished as this incredible port. So the question then becomes, what is it that makes this so significant? And I think that in making those harbors, the technologies that have been put forward, again, this is in particular true of the countries, the Low Countries of the Netherlands and of Belgium, which have developed enormous expertise in dredging and land reclamation, the processes that they needed in order to sort of tame the North Sea in order not to be inundated. Those technologies that have been invented were then transported first through colonialism, but then sort of through the sort of modern capital investments to other parts of the world. And so what you see is those processes of land reclamation and dredging being transported to places like in Dubai or Singapore. Actually, Singapore is another place that you see enormous amounts of land reclamation and dredging happening in order to make a harbor, which is not necessarily the absolutely most amenable harbor to megaships coming in, to making it actually, one of those destinations for ships. But also, I think, again, here, it's not just the technology that is really important, but also the politics that goes into it, because how do you decide what is going to be a port of transit? And how do you decide how these harbors, what sort of amenities these harbors are going to have in order for that harbor to be inviting? So you have either really great technological sort of automated technologies that allow for ships to be unloaded quickly with a fast turnaround, et cetera, or you're going to have to have very cheap labor that you can exploit so that cost of a turnaround is not very high. Either way, these processes taken, that they have to include ways of disciplining labor, whether through cheaper wages or through automation, which makes the port, that particular harbor, inviting. And then you have to have, as I said, other kinds of goodies that you can offer shipping companies, everything from the ability to refuel to free zones where there are goods produced that can be shipped off, to lands and rail or roads and rail that can go from the ship and go into other directions to make that particular location exciting. And then you can have a Dubai, which has long-standing relationships and, like many merchant ports, tends to act neutrally when there are conflicts between neighboring countries. So one of the things that has been really interesting is, despite, for example, the belligerence between Abu Dhabi and Iran, Dubai has continued to be quite an important sort of transit port for Iranian goods, despite the fact that Dubai is probably the single most important R&R port for the U.S. Navy in the Middle East. No questions asked, because of course U.S. sailors would love to be able to go partying in Dubai's clubs and restaurants. Despite that, Dubai still also has incredibly flourishing trade relations with Iran. The fact that it can do that also, so the political decision to act as a kind of a commercial node and not get involved in the geopolitical conflicts of its richer neighbor, Abu Dhabi, says something also about the way that these harbors function and how some of them can become much more important than others.
There's obviously you get into the legal frameworks and also the sort of the inward facing element of a port, that being all the infrastructure that gets in there. I want to touch on that maybe as we look at what's going on in this country and around the world in terms of like shipping. But before we get to that, I just also want to talk about, one of the things that I've come to understand both through your book, but also, just in news reports over the course of COVID, is this practice of basically abandoning ships but where the owners abandon the ships and leave sailors and workers basically on the boat to starve or figure out what they're going to do. They have no way to get to shore. Will you just explain this dynamic to us? I mean, I think at one point there was also a story about a Saudi ship which had many Filipino workers. This may have been in the 80s, but we're hearing stories like this, it seems to me, quite often. Where will you explain that? It just seems baffling to me and shocking.
So abandoned ships is actually something that is really central to sort of central, but also peripheral to a lot of the global trade. It happens to be mostly ship owners that have one or two ships, often rust buckets, that are often not very well insured. In fact, they probably can't be insured because they are such bad rust buckets. And they often fly the flag off, meaning they follow the regulations of countries which the International Transport Workers Federation, a global union for seafarers and dockers, has pronounced as flags of convenience. Flags of convenience, or open registries, are these registries in countries which take a fee off of you, and then they essentially give you the ability to fly this flag, and they sort of promise to do inspections on your ship. But the rules around labor and environmental stuff is extremely lax in these flags of convenience. And some flags of convenience are better than others, but most aren't that great. However, they're very much appreciated and preferred by many of the shipping companies in the world, in part because they can pay lower wages. They don't have to adhere to so many sort of national regulations. They can be much laxer when it comes to environmental stuff. And so whenever you have these, whenever you hear of catastrophes at sea, sort of environmental catastrophes at sea, oil leakages, even the Ever Given sort of grounding into the Suez Canal earlier this year, they're often flying flags of convenience because the ships are it's just the rules and regulations can be laxer. In the case of abandoned ships, let's say a ship owner decides that they want to make a bit of money and they don't care about the workers that are aboard the ship. So they contract to deliver a cargo from point A to point B. They deliver the cargo from point A to point B and then refuse to pay the wages of the workers that were aboard the ship and just essentially abandon the ship. Often it's because often they don't have insurance on the ship, so they can't even recover it, but the ship was already a rust bucket, and that final cargo that was delivered probably paid handsomely to the owner. But that also means that then the seafarers on that ship are often abandoned at a port to which they do not belong, to which they do not have access, and then they're left on board the ship. They're probably not allowed to disembark from the ship because they're often at sea and they have not been given permission, or they cannot pay the port fees. They run out of fuel, so they run out of electricity. They run out of stores, so they run out of food. And then they're at the mercy, essentially, of charities at sea to come and rescue them, or to at least give them water or food, or to sort of negotiate on their behalf with whatever port they're at in order to be able to get them home, because they're obviously not paid their wages, but they're also not paid their cost of a plane ticket home. And so you end up seeing these cases, and some of them are outrageous. A number of these ships have been abandoned, for example, on the coast of the UAE, and some of them have been, for example, out there for somewhere between 2 years to 3 years. So there are people sitting on board these ships living on charity that, for example, the Mission to Seafarers brings on a little speedboat to them, rice and lentils and water in order for them to be able to survive, and then has to negotiate on their behalf to get them off the ship. The problem is that if the particular country or the particular ship, the particular country at which they're stranded, or the particular flag of convenience that they are not signatories to the various global regulations around this stuff, if they get off the ship, they might lose the possibility of ever being able to reclaim their wages. And of course, they've been dependent on those wages for years. What we've seen, I mean, these cases used to happen with some frequency, but what has been completely dispiriting is that in the last year and a half, 2 years, over the course of the COVID pandemic, the cases of abandonment have just shot up. The International Labour Organization maintains a database of abandoned ships. Anybody can actually search it on Google and can find it. And the numbers of ships that have been abandoned has just skyrocketed in the last year and a half. And that means that there are not just hundreds, but probably thousands of seafarers that are sitting on these rust buckets and, awaiting to see what might happen to them because they cannot get off the ships.
Well, you talk about like how there are macro and micro examples of what this system has done in global capitalism. That's a real micro example of the consequences of this, and how, like, essentially on these maritime routes, the laws that govern that are just the laws of global capitalism, and yeah.
More or less, yes. And I think, again, this is one of those cases where if a country at which you're not abandoned is not signatory to international treaties, which is, of course, how most of these transnational laws, I'm putting scare quotes around law, the way these things work, if those countries are not signatories, then you are essentially left to laws of capitalism, which is that nobody's going to protect you.
It's also incredibly convenient that there is a system for which to deliver goods and a system in which to get paid for these goods, and just not a system to make sure that there aren't people stuck in a boat for 2 or 3 years, begging for food, essentially. Yeah. I mean, oops, we forgot that one thing to work out, I guess.
I think it's really important to note that there obviously the International Transport Workers Federation, or unions representing the seafarers in countries which allow unions, and also sort of NGOs that try to do charity work with these groups, tend to be trying to operate on their behalf. But as you say, there's no enforcement mechanism to make countries actually listen to the plight of these seafarers.
And we should say, as you talk about in the context of the sort of the Janus face, I guess, of the port, the idea of like what's happening inland, there's its own other subset of similar labor exploitation. But let's turn to what's going on in this country, and I presume in other countries around the world to some degree, and maybe it's not necessarily the same dynamic. But we're hearing stories. They're full-on reports of how backed up we are at our ports in terms of ships in the sea. It seems to be a function of, or at least one element of it is, the nature of the truckers who are tasked with picking stuff up at a port and the way that they're paid, or I should say not paid. Can you tell us what's going on with our supply lines relative to what's happening with the ships?
So I think that there are actually multiple things going on that is causing the sort of the global supply chain backup. So first, when we came out of the first lockdown, there were a lot of containers out of place, if you will, which meant that there was actually a shortage of containers in the container boxes which transport aboard ships and actually make multimodal transportation, i.e. transportation of goods between ships and rail and roads, so trucks, possible, because those standardized containers easily transfer between them. So these containers were out of place. There were empty containers where people didn't need empty containers, weren't filling up those empty containers. So loads of empty containers located in, for example, ports of Europe and Americas where China needed them, and not enough empty containers in China. And so you had that first thing that emerged that caused some problems. The second thing that caused a lot of the problems was that, of course, China, because of its very stringent rules around COVID and its very stringent shutdowns, essentially shut down the global factory in really quite drastic sorts of ways. So the global, the production node of the supply chain really came to a halt. But that also, I mean, people don't remember this, but a number of ports in China were actually completely shut down. There was nothing going in or out of them in the first sort of at the beginning of the pandemic, so in around the beginning of 2020. But China has continued to shut down some of its ports, which means that goods cannot come in, and raw materials cannot come in, and goods cannot leave. And so, because those ports are shut down. And so, of course, given the centrality of China to these webs of trade, that really generates a huge problem in terms of goods. But then in the case of the US has some very specific problems of its own. On the one hand, it has only a handful of ports that can handle some of these bigger ships. So LA and Long Beach, for example, Oakland possibly, and a few ports on the East Coast. And that means that these particular ports end up being massively congested when the ships arrive. They just can't get a berth to unload the ships. But then you have the land-based issues that are going on. And we have issues in the UK around Brexit. We don't have enough drivers to drive the ships. In the US, the problem is slightly different. In the US, essentially the process by which truck drivers were involved in picking up goods, picking up containers out of the ports, was that these truck drivers would arrive at the port, and when there was some good for them to transport, they would be called upon to do so. In essence, I was just reading this somewhere. Somebody was comparing this to sitting there unpaid, waiting for somebody to give you a job. So essentially, when you actually look at it, the amount of money that they were earning divided by the time that they were spending would end up be massively sort of diminished their wages, and that has translated into extreme unhappiness on the part of these truck drivers. And so you also see that a lot of people are dropping out of that sort of process, and or you're also seeing, I'm hearing sort of news about strikes, unionization among these drivers in lots of locations. So that the sort of the congestion on the land side is another factor around this. And again, this has also to do with the way that both the wage structures, but also the physical infrastructures have functioned over the course of the last few years, and the sort of the slight break, disjuncture that the pandemic created has suddenly thrown a sort of massive spotlight on issues that people had managed to sort of put a Band-Aid over, and now suddenly can't.
So how does this get, I mean, you know, the different problems that you've mentioned, it's easier to see how some of them can get resolved than others, right? I mean, at one point there won't be a pandemic, theoretically. Let's knock on wood. But with this trucker thing in particular, like, you know, why would I be an independent trucker and go to these ports? I mean, it seems like we're in a feedback loop with that, right? Because why would I go to this port, wait maybe 20 hours to get that, and I'm not getting paid by the hour, I'm getting paid by the load. So I'm doing half the amount of loads that I could have maybe 3 years ago. So I don't have the potential to make this money. But the port needs me to show up and take this stuff off so that we can start to sort of like get the log jam going. But there's fewer of me as an independent trucker going there. There's a feedback loop here, obviously, because it gets more crowded. Takes longer for you to get your cargo. You decide, I'm not doing that. I'll go get a job paid hourly for some shipping company, or I'm going to go do, I don't know, concerts are happening again. Maybe I'll do those. But so how does this get resolved? I mean,
this is a fantastic question. And I think actually it goes back to the fact that ports often have been the site of casualized labor. I mean, we look at the gig economy, right? We look at the Uber drivers or delivery drivers or Lyft drivers, and we think that this is something new. But in fact, actually port workers, whether the truck drivers or old school stevedores and dockers, certainly in the UK, were actually casualized. They would arrive at the gate of the port and would hope that somebody takes them up to unload a ship at a given time. That was the case in the UK actually until the 1970s. If you think about that, that's actually really shocking. So what people were expected to do was precisely that, to just go on ahead and waste their own time waiting out there for goods to be taken up. I mean, looking at it from a left-wing point of view, the only solution is for proper employment for these truck drivers, so that they can actually go on ahead and if they have to wait, they're getting paid for it. They're not that this idea of independent worker, you know, your own boss is a kind of a fantasy. You are not your own boss. What you're doing is because you're self-exploiting on behalf of whoever it is that is benefiting, whether it's Uber or Lyft or Deliveroo, or in this case, it's the shipping companies from the fact that you are actually eating the hours that you're sitting there doing nothing. And so in a sense, this process of casualization has to end if we're looking to some sort of a solution that is longer lasting and just on behalf of these truck drivers, but also if we want the supply chains to be more resilient. The problem is that resiliency and efficiency are actually at odds. And if we want resilient, we want functioning, we want just processes, just supply chains. That means that those processes of efficiency, pushing down wages, disciplining labor is just not going to be working very well in a long-term way.
I want to just end on that note about resiliency and efficiency being at loggerheads, just to be clear with people, like what that means. If I'm going to do all my, like an on-demand supply chain, it's going to be very efficient, but all it takes is one little break, and I've got no extra of those widgets that I need to complete my car or whatever it is I'm building. If I'm going to just do the same on demand with labor, it's going to save me money, but that's not going to guarantee that the labor is going to be there, because at one point they're going to go like, this is horrible for me, so I'm not going to show up. I mean, we have this throughout that process. So people should understand that concept, that if we want to make sure that we have a resilient supply chain, we're going to have to pay a little bit more because it's going to be, you're paying for the resiliency as opposed to the efficiency.
I mean, it's interesting because the Ever Given thing actually made this extremely clear, because so many different, the blockage of the Suez Canal, not just the goods that were on Ever Given, but on the hundreds of ships that were stuck on either side of the Suez Canal in the Mediterranean and in the Red Sea, that made it clear, because so many of the just-in-time manufacturing processes that were dependent on goods that were sitting on those ships that were delayed actually broke down during that period. And so that was part, that actually makes incredibly clear that we are operating an enormously complex machine, and having everything stretched taut in order to make it efficient actually means that even the smallest breakages are going to make the whole entire machine collapse. And so I think that is something that we really need to be aware of. Redundancies are really important, not job redundancies, but sort of having multiple possibilities, but also higher wages, more commitments, to the people who are working, making the system work, is really important if we want this system to actually be resilient.
Laleh Khalili, the professor of international politics at Queen Mary University of London. And the book is Sinews of War and Trade, Shipping and Capitalism in the Arabian Peninsula. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We're going to put a link to that at majority.fm.
Lovely. I really enjoyed it. Thanks very much, Sam and Emma.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.
All right, folks. We're going to, we just got I am, where someone, Wayne Kerr says,
damn it.
Describing the Yemen war as led by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, not mentioning USA's involvement. It was an oversight by Mrs. Khalili. That genocide would not be possible without USA's support. Biden and Blinken need to be pressured to live up to their campaign promises. That's correct. Should say, when she discusses it in the book, it's quite clear that U.S. has
I'm sorry.
Enabled that.
Sometimes everyone can't say everything you're thinking at the same time.
But yeah, she wouldn't resist that.
Yes.
Not at all. Not at all. Folks, speaking of irresistible, we're heading into the fun half, and you can join us by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. It is your help that allows this show to survive and thrive. We are no longer drowning in Comcast money.
Right. Well, did you know this? We went a little, long.
We did. Yeah.
This is one of the non-Peacock features. You can go long, you can go short. You
can really not shave for an extended period of time and not worry about any type of blowback.
You're going to bring back the stash?
You know what? You're not the first person to say that.
Because it's November.
Oh, that's right. This is the year. This. So last night, I went. The only thing I did for my costume was I bought fake mustache.
Okay. Were you Ted Lasso like Mitt Romney?
That's exactly what I did at that point, because I was like, "What? Who's a guy with a mustache?" Ted Lasso, and I made a little. I have never seen the show.
Yeah.
And but I knew he had a whistle, and so I made a whistle out of Legos and put it around a string.
Oh.
And that was nobody got it, nobody liked it, and I of course to the extent that
barely got it,
to the extent that anybody else did. Like I was like, I'm Ted Lasso, and one person was like, oh, and then I couldn't talk about the show because I've never seen it.
Yeah.
So it was really not a good costume.
I'm surprised
you copied Mitt Romney.
Right.
But then I also wore. I had another mustache that was grayer and one with gray eyebrows, and I went as me like 6 months from now, which
Very
evolved
prescient.
after I had to walk like 3 8-year-olds around the block, 3 8-year-old boys who were trick-or-treating, and that aged me too. Then I could have just taken off the things and I looked like that.
How'd it go?
It was difficult.
Yeah. Just you?
It was just me. And
Jeez.
just telling the kids, like, guys, you're not supposed to take a whole handful. It's rude. And or say thank you. Like it took a while. Like a drill sergeant with those kids. Folks, don't forget also, we have a live show. January 16th. You best buy your tickets now.
Yes.
Do not dilly-dally. Believe me. We have links in the YouTube and in the podcast description to go buy your tickets for our January 16th live show. It is going to be awesome. And you're going to enjoy it. Don't forget, check out Nomi's show, youtube.com/The Nomiki Show. Find that on YouTube and on Rofkin as well.
Rockfin?
What is it?
It's Rofkin.
I said Rofkin.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Yes, you did.
Matt, what's happening on the...
It's Rockfin.
Oh. I messed up that.
On Left Reckoning, for patrons this weekend, we had GP Jacob, who is the host of the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast out of Minneapolis, to talk about the upcoming elections and the basically the past year of uprising street activity in Minneapolis, and how maybe an 80% white electorate where the median age is 63 might not be the best to carry out the demands of the people who were in the streets last year. But we talk about that and the rent control stuff on the ballot. And also Jacob Fry is sort of the ideal neoliberal mayor. So we're going to release that actually tonight for everybody, because we don't like to keep it behind the paywall because there's an election tomorrow. So tonight it will premiere at Left Reckoning YouTube channel, as long as 25 people subscribe on YouTube.
Don't boo. Go vote.
Yeah, don't boo, vote.
Folks, 646-257-3920 is the number. We will see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black. African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Number 646-257-3920. We are now accepting your phone calls. Couple IMs left of the box. In case I don't get through on the phone, I want to thank the MR community for all their support. Today is the 1-year anniversary of my YouTube show, Left of the Box. And this community has been super supportive and encouraging. I truly appreciate it. Left is best.
Awesome.
Congratulations on that anniversary. Give you one of them. And Cherry Ghost says, this weekend I became a paying subscriber of both MR and the Daily Poster.
Very nice.
And thanks for all you do. Would love more regular climate updates on the show from someone like Kate Aronoff. We should have her on soon. Appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. Folks, Josh Hawley, it's so funny to watch this guy sort of just plot out. This is like, you ever watch like a show or a movie in particular, or, you know, even a play where the bones stick out of it, where you can see that somebody read, you know, whatever the script.
Are withdrawing into the enclave of idleness and pornography and video games. I found the comment by one young man to a Wall Street Journal reporter particularly evocative and particularly heartbreaking. He said, "I'm sort of waiting for a light to come on so I can figure out what to do next."
Just break this down a little bit. Like, you know, it is the assault on masculinity, which is driving people to video games and pornography. Matt, do you want
to? I mean, you kind of put me on the spot here. Yeah, I mean, I don't like the way people say don't lift weights and grunt and this other masculine stuff. So I go into my room, lock the door, turn on the Xbox, and also the internet.
Yeah. Technology might have something to do with this too.
Yeah, I feel like, well, that's the thing is, like, to the extent that any of these people are going to criticize markets, it's that there's too much pornography in the markets and it's degenerate liberals trying to, like, pervert us, basically. Like, that's where Brett Weinstein goes to. So it's like that. This is their anti-market pivot, basically.
Maybe this is a way for Hawley to get out ahead of Cruz in the upcoming 2024 primary cycle.
No.
Well,
doubt. No doubt.
I mean, Ted Cruz, famous porn watcher. So this is why Hawley's able to nail him on this. No pun intended.
You got to be able to get the Christian right in the Republican Party. Otherwise, you will have no chance. And Donald Trump did this by bringing on the biggest theocrat in the country, Mike Pence, and having Mike Pence vouch for him and basically saying he is an agent of God. He's not necessarily the guy you like, but he's going to be the guy who's going to deliver it for us. And in many respects, he did. We're going to see today. There's oral arguments about Roe v. Wade happening out of the context of Texas. This is what's going on.
And to the extent that there's a crisis in sort of a search for meaning in young men, I don't think it's sort of what they're going to I guess sort of release themselves from that. It's that like life doesn't have meaning because like you have to work for a capitalist, and you know your wages are stagnant, and probably things like that lead to these sorts of substance or media abuse.
Addictive behaviors, I mean, like the internet and social media, I guess, and pornography to an extent have addictive qualities to them. But like, we were talking before the show about Ben Shapiro. He had a book on pornography from 2016. And this is the same shit over and over. Yeah. It's moral panic, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Like, it's been the same playbook every time, and they just update the software a little bit every 5 or 10 years in order to make it a bit more relevant, applicable to the current times. But you know, like, I mean, that's you keep returning to the well if you want to get that constituency, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Johan Hari point in Chasing the Scream, which is that it's this larger society problems that exacerbate these sorts of addiction issues, and if the addictions are getting worse, it's probably because of those mass societal problems and not because people are just getting worse at dealing with addictions.
And it's not just Josh Hawley pushing this. Of course, when he talks about the assault on masculinity, driving people to the internet and to porn, all of the sort of the rise in transphobia we're seeing is basically rushing in to fill the vacuum of that was created when the Supreme Court validated same-sex marriage and took that issue off the playing field. I'm not convinced that it's completely gone, but nevertheless, it doesn't have the same salience for the Christian right that transphobia does. And so here is on One America Network, Christina Bobb and Donna Jackson. Should we take clip 5 first, Matt? Yeah, let's do clip 5, because, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, I'm going to, do I even need to tell you what is going on right now with passports that has everybody in a tizzy? Probably not.
Yeah, we already know, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure there's a lot of people sort of really concerned about this, but here it is.
The U.S. Department of State recently issued the first ever passport with a gender X designation. The State Department did not say to whom the passport was issued, but a spokesperson called the move historic and celebratory. Is this really what the State Department should be focused on, Donna?
No.
Pause it for 1 second. Pause it for 1 second. Let's be clear. When the State Department issues an X on the passport, they're not focused on anything.
Yeah. No.
They're just saying, okay, X can be, if you want your gender to be X, that can be it. I think they're doing the focusing. There's no other, the State Department's not like, we've allotted 75% of our budget to the X.
You are hopelessly naive. You don't understand that all of the energy that's going into printing X on passports, it could be going towards fighting ISIS, but that's why the terrorists are winning, right?
You go. Exactly.
There's a finite amount of energy, and now the X designation has taken up way too much time.
I got to reach all the way over here on the computer. Go ahead.
Is this really what the State Department should be focused on, Donna?
No. Listen, this State Department's core mission is to make sure safe passage from different countries. If
Like
they
to
weren't
issue
so
passports?
focused on this gender issue, maybe they could have did a better job in Afghanistan. We still have people stranded over there. But instead, they care about what pronoun people have. And that's far from what we should be focused on.
Why is accountant Donna on OAN to tell this story? I mean, her Chiron said accountant and
also part of a
member of
political group.
Project 21.
I'm gonna bet that she just actually just works at OAN, and they're just like, could you? Are you doing anything right now?
Are you allocating your energy to getting those people out of Afghanistan?
You're an accountant. You must know like letters and like. Should we play this one? Is the one run right in it? Okay. Yeah. This is part 2 of that. This is Chris Farrell, Executive Director of Judicial Watch. They've got to weigh in on this whole thing. The State Department's just gone completely rogue.
Chris, do you think this actually makes the U.S. passport harder to use? If you have enough of the information that's confusing and subjective, it will be harder as a border agent to take a look at it and actually believe that the person on the passport is the person that you're looking at.
This is craziness. Go to the science. What does the chromosome say about the individual?
Pause it for 1 second. Now, listen, how many of us, and this is one of the things that I find really irritating about international travel, is the chromosome search. And the methodology they use to find this chromosome sometimes gets borderline inappropriate.
And sometimes it's not as clarifying as we're hoping it would.
Exactly. And then this whole thing where you're not allowed to change your haircut or
It's so obvious. We just need to do this test that we developed in the 90s.
Continue. All right. This is just unbelievable.
This is craziness. Go to the science. What does the chromosome say about the individual? That's the answer.
Yeah.
They can have all sorts of feelings and ideas and wishes. That's lovely. The science, by their chromosome check or test, XX or XY, that defines
Chromosome
who they are,
check or test?
regardless of how they feel about it.
It's bizarre. If I identify as a 6'5" black male who, makes a certain amount of money and, has a certain physique, and I say that, and that's what the State Department actually gives me as a passport, how does anybody check my passport?
Correct. It erodes and just shreds any kind of reliability in the sort of documentation that's needed, not just for identity, but for international travel, for conducting business, for any number of things. And now we have a government-sponsored fake ID is what it really ends up with.
That's a really interesting way to put it, but I think you're right.
I'm sure you do. I mean,
I like the handshake she has to do. Like, let me just clear my head of that ridiculous nonsense that we just did, and just think about my television career that's taking off.
I'll talk about the science with whatever that guy is. I mean, there's such a thing called intersex people, and there are millions of them, and they don't fit into the exact chromosomal definition there.
Yes, but
and
Emma,
so they pick a gender in this binary system to identify as.
But
Emma, this will all be resolved with the chromosome checker test that we would run on everybody.
The Judicial Watch gender check or chromosome check is more of a vibe test.
Yeah.
I love the idea that, like, this is just like her assuming somebody else's identity.
It's the exact same thing. I mean, they would have no other way of being able to tell whether or not she was what did she say, a 5'8" black man?
5'6".
5'6". She picked a specific.
There was some height. She wanted some height.
Yeah, well, it would be easy to determine that.
Also, I don't think it mattered like what she's like who had some sort of like money or something like that. Like that's not on the passport, is it? Do we list your income on the passport?
I do.
Well, I like to wear like a tie that has like a money symbol on it to indicate I'm doing well. Cha-ching. That's what
they go searching for your chromosome and find a wad of cash.
I think you might find that in my big fat wallet.
Hell fucking yeah.
Yeah, like please, like don't test me. It's authoritarianism to test me for coronavirus before I get on this plane, but please give me that chromosome check.
test.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
after you grope me while trying to find a bomb while I go on this airplane.
Also inspect all my daughter's, basketball team to make sure they are all gendered and chromosome checked too.
Amazing Sam Seder on the IM. Thank you. Very kind. Hey, MR crew. I'm starting a mutual aid organization called Amazing Sam Seder. IR ass for short. With your help, we can get a large ass. So please go to the Discord or chat and say you're looking for ass, and we will contact you. Left cheek is best. Happy Monday, everyone. A very odd audience. Maryland Mailman. Maryland Mailman. Oh, Maryland Mailman. There we go. I'm surprised you're into Nirvana. Took you as a Devo, Talking Heads, Bugle kind of guy. Well, I had my Talking Heads and Devo phase. And can you sing Those Were the Days like Edith Bunker? I probably could in some other circumstance, but not now.
Maybe at the live show.
Maybe at the live show.
I feel like we got a huge part of the audience that doesn't remember when we used to play music every day.
I know it. I know it. We used to play tunes, and I wish we could bring that back in some fashion. Maybe we'll figure out a way. Brooklyn Sue, please send my sweet cat Becky on her journey away from cancer with Shofar.
Oh,
I'm sorry to hear that. This is very big. Sam's tight pants. Please read this theory on why Jayapal's actions just may have led to the ultimate change to the filibuster. Did we do that? Did we change the filibuster yet? Over the weekend, Politico reported that Jayapal asked Ron Klain to not have President Biden ask for a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure deal. On last Thursday, the White House decided to take that course, which apparently surprised Pelosi and Hoyer and Clyburn, who thought the president was going to call for a vote. Now these two votes pushed to next week. At the earliest, on the surface transportation reauthorization ran out on October 31st, so they pushed it to December 3rd. Now onto the debt ceiling. I can't do all this. We'll have to wait and see. I appreciate it. Send it as an email, and if you haven't already, we'll get to it. Nana Perez. Every time Rick Scott comes up in conversation, I'd like to point out that you can still find his 2018 campaign ads on YouTube, where he was running on term limits. Within his first term, he became NRSC chairman, publicly pushed Chuck Grassley to run for re-election. My sister is an accountant and interviewed for a job at Newsmax. She withdrew herself from the process after she realized who they were. Should tell her that she lost an opportunity to be on TV and talk about gender pronouns versus Afghan refugees. Well, to be fair, that was One America Network, but the point still remains. It's always snowy in Ottawa. Saw the bitch fit Gigi threw about Matt critiquing Door's anti-vaccination monetization.
Yeah.
Is the Comcast money supposed to be the now dead Peacock deal? Yes, that's my belief.
Yeah, but you don't stop drowning. Once you've drowned in something, you stay drowned.
Well, you drowned. I'm totally drowned. Today he's going on about only resistant libs are the real grifters because they monetized Russiagate.
Yeah, there's definitely no other avenues to a quick audience.
Indeed. I would be curious if they think that the 3 or 4 interviews, maybe 5 interviews we did with Marcy Wheeler over the course of 4 years brought in the big bucks. There's nothing like those 2 or 3 hour shows.
Although don't say Marcy Wheeler to them, they might lose their minds.
Lose their minds.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, look, the bottom line is there's been studies that show the only way you maintain a Substack is you got to have like really a big Twitter presence. Glenn is now sort of like flailing around, trying to generate more conservative eyeballs. And the problem is he has both a ceiling. Yeah, I mean, and look, he's making, I don't know, $1.5 million a year off his Substack, maybe more, maybe less. not much more, not much less, but somewhere in that neighborhood. And then he's got his Rumble deal, his 6-figure Rumble deal with Peter Thiel, and God knows what else. So he's going to be fine.
Yeah, but his free speech is kind of limited. He can't say what he feels about Title 42. He can't say if he agrees with Jimmy Dore about what he was saying about vaccines. He can just say that it's hypocritical for me to criticize Jimmy. So he has the money, but not the free speech, which I think is probably a big issue for him.
Yeah, that's difficult.
And you get engagement by engaging with like other personalities on the left online.
I've made it.
And the currency he has is that he, at least for many years, appeared to be a part of that same crowd. And so he's, dunking on the same people. It's almost like a why I left the left situation. It's just a Dave Rubin project, but with a lot more adjectives and pejoratives.
It is funny that Dave Rubin clicked saying Glenn Greenwald is saying a lot of things that I was saying 4 years ago, because he's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly
he's
right.
in the exact same space. But if you just had a thesaurus in front of you.
Part of this came from a tweet, a really unfortunate tweet, I think, by Professor Wolf, Richard Wolf, who I'm a big fan of. But nobody is infallible. He wrote on October 29th. Can you put this up? Do you want to put this one up? Yeah. See if you can. It's not pro versus anti-vaccine, he wrote. The issue is class struggle. Have employers' dictates/mandates become intolerable for employees? So that's the question. That's a valid question to ask. And his answer is record job quitting plus strikes plus refusals of mask/vaccine mandates say yes. Now, the problem with this is that, A, there should be a link with this to the data that he's talking about. And there's also a timing situation. I mean, I think the easiest response is just simply Dean Baker wrote the highest quit rates were in Kentucky, Georgia, and Idaho, not states big in pushing vaccine mandates, without a doubt. And if you look at the development of these strikes and what they call now maybe like the Great Resignation, all of this happened way before any type of vaccine mandates. And if it was simply a mask mandate, you would see this across the sectors. But show me the people who work in retail who didn't want a mask mandate. Show me the people who work at restaurants who didn't want a mask mandate. I mean, the bottom line is it's not inconceivable that something like this would be part of a class struggle, but there's simply no data to support it. In fact, all the data suggests that no, people just realize like, hey, wait a second, this job sucks. And it's probably made worse because I got to deal with some a-hole at work who won't wear their mask or is complaining about being vaccinated. And I'm worried about my mom. I'm worried about my kid, whatever it is. And so, if anything, the vaccine mandates and masks could be also a boon to working class people. But certainly we would need data to make this assessment. He just says like, say yes. No, they don't. Record job quitting happened way before the vaccine mandate at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, and like was it the Southwest thing that all like Jack Posobiec was trying to pretend like it was some sort of massive walkout when the pilots were very clear that they were having issues with the way they were being scheduled and given forced time off and things like that. So when you the harm here is when you collapse it into this anti-vax, anti-mask stuff, which is frankly like boss class, small business owners class rhetoric instead of what the actual workers are demanding in all these struggles. And like you said, like if there were certain places where workers were saying, hey, you're gonna have to pay me more if I'm gonna have to mask up or get a vax mandate, I think that is a worker demand that should be listened to.
Yes.
But that is not the one being elaborated.
Compulsory vaccination, again, you can talk about it being coercive and maybe feeling uncomfortable with that, but it's not as coercive as having to go to work in a deadly pandemic and potentially infecting others and being infected. I mean, that's like you're forced to do that and forced to risk your life to exist in this society.
And then forced to serve people who are also like skirting the mandate. Too,
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
So
there's no way. Mandates are the only way to do this in this country.
well, if you want, if you want to make it a broader conversation about like how capitalism is coercive or compulsory, that's fine. But like in the reality we exist in, this is the way to protect people.
Dave Parrott. Sam, I forgot to reach out last month. October marks my wife's, Carol and I's 10-year anniversary as Majority Report supporters. Can you give her a shofar for her forever 49th birthday, which is today? Thank you. I certainly can. Happy birthday, Carol, and thank you guys for your support over the years. Much appreciated. I just bummed out about Professor Wolf doing that.
Yeah.
But I understand the desire to see that in that context, but you really need to have support for that type of perspective, it seems to me. And it just doesn't exist. When you start to look at the numbers, it looks like, no, maybe it's the opposite. Mm-hmm. People are more inclined to come back when they're feeling like they're working in a safe environment. I mean, the idea of like mandates, there's other mandates too. Like you can't force somebody to work on machinery that hasn't been, or there's safety mandates for workers.
You have to wear this protective gear if working in this job.
I mean, it's so uneven that we have all this time about, coddling people who have basically been misled about the vaccines. But what about the folks who don't want to come back because they don't trust that the vaccine will protect them and their family enough, especially to go back out into the workforce to maybe serve people, right? Like that sort of precaution isn't talked about at all because you have to get your ass back to work. That's just the underlying thing everyone agrees to, apparently.
It does. We've covered Tate Reeves, the Republican governor of Mississippi, on the show, who doesn't necessarily want to come out against vaccine mandates because behind the scenes, the bosses that populate Mississippi and do business there, they want vaccine mandates because they want people to come back to work.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. Like when it comes down to dollars and cents, the bosses, the power wants their workers to get the vaccine so that they can maximize their ability to exploit the workforce. That's the reality.
But the point is that the workers feel more comfortable for the most part when other people are vaccinated, or at the very least, that's as reasonable as an assumption when you're not dealing with any data as the opposite.
Now, I didn't mean to feed into that framing about it being exploitative. It's just
it is.
But
I mean, look. I mean, of course, coercive. To the extent that work is.
Yes.
And it is coercive. But again, there is no data to support that the resignations, the strikes are a function of masking. I mean,
I don't know,
or masking or vaccinations. It doesn't exist. I don't know. So is the Met Warrior strike about vaccination mandates that's been going on since February? Is the Worcester nurses strike about vaccinations and mask wearing? No, on the contrary. They're worried about the safety of their clients. Obviously that's just two, but you go and look at when these things took place, when these resignations took place, what was building on these strikes and these strikes authorizations. It wasn't because they're being forced to vax. He's just looking at what's happening with the New York union, cops union, maybe the firefighters and the trash collectors. But again, we're talking about a narrow slice of those groups too.
And just after you saw the way that all those right-wingers tried to make the Southwest stuff about the masks, like it's a clear propaganda initiative by those folks. You have to be sensitive to that.
Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam and Emma. This is John from San Antonio.
Hey, John.
John from San Antonio. It has been too long.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all the interviews that both of you conducted for Peacock and Ring of Fire, and I understand that now both of you will have more free time to spend with your family and friends, but I just want to thank you for all the great interviews you had.
Well, John, I think we're talking about maybe reviving some of them in a new digest, but that probably won't happen for another couple of weeks. But stay tuned for that. But here, I would have put this out. Anybody who watched this show, either the Majority Report or Reported, as we called it for part of the time, you did not know that?
That's what it was called.
On Peacock, send us an email. Yeah. Because we heard that somebody came to the show from it, and that was the first indication that we had that there was actually live people watching it. Now, John, you're the only other person I know who has been watching it, and usually that's enough for me. But because of exhaustion from the pandemic, I needed at least 2 more people watching.
Okay. All right. Centrist Democrat Alcee Hastings represented the 20th District of Florida for many years, but in April he passed away. And the primaries to fill his seat will happen tomorrow. The area covers Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, and has 53% of the population is black and 23% is Hispanic. 11 candidates are running in the Democratic primary, and according to the latest poll from Expedition Strategies, brand new Congress endorsed Sheila Sherphillis McCormick has the slight lead over 2 more centrist candidates, who are both Broward County commissioners, Dale Honest and Barbara Sharif. This is Sherphillis McCormick's 3rd time in a row to run for this seat. She supports Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, as well as a means-tested form of basic income, where if you're over 18, you get $1,000 a month if you make less than $75,000 a year. This on top of the other benefits you may be receiving from the government. Another good candidate in this race is Omari Hardy, who's endorsed by the Progressive Campaign Change Committee. He's a 31-year-old former member of the Florida House. Hardy has an excellent issue set. He was in 3rd place in the race in a Data for Progress poll that came out last July. But he was probably hurt by attacks from the Democratic Majority for Israel, who criticized them for supporting Palestinian human rights. The biggest progressive win of 2021 was India's Walton's shocking victory in the Democratic primary in Buffalo's mayoral race. Walton beat 4-time incumbent Mayor Byron Brown by 7%. Unfortunately, Brown has decided to run again as a write-in candidate. Walton is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and has captured the hearts of leftists across the country. She's been endorsed by Bernie Sanders and AOC, as well as other centrist Democrats. Sadly, the polling has been bad for Walton. The latest Emerson poll has her down by 18 points, but when you're dealing with a low turnout election where one candidate has to depend on write-in votes, the odds are maybe more even than they appear. I'm not a big Terry McAuliffe fan, but most observers will be talking about this race. In 2017, the Real Clear polling average had Ralph Northam up by 3 points, and he ended up winning by 9 points. And there were also a ton of polls near the end of that race, and there were very few polls that came out recently, even though 2 did come out today. They were Republican-oriented polls. It's incredibly sad to see the false rhetoric of the racist claims of critical race theory has captured the minds of independent voters, and to see Republicans who are once motivated, who are more motivated to vote than Democrats by double-digit margins. One of the biggest questions is whether McAuliffe can win in Fairfax and Loudoun counties by the wide margins like other candidates have been doing in the last decade. Northam had 1.4 million votes, which is 225,000 more than the highest previous record. So I think both candidates will win number will probably be at 1.5 million, possibly 6. Well, I think it's more. This is an important race, and other down ballot races have consequences in Virginia. The whole political landscape can change over the course of a year, and short-term predictions, or is they historically mostly inaccurate? In the 21st century, whoever wins in the Virginia's governor's race only wins 60% of the time in the midterms in the House in the next election.
So you're saying that this is not that indicative of, it's not necessarily indicative of any type of thing that we're going to see in the midterms?
Well, I'm not saying for sure. I mean, 60% is still a majority, but I mean, you know, like in 2013, you know, McAuliffe won, and you know, and Republicans picked up seats in the midterms. And in 2001, Mark Warner won, and for the governor, and Republicans gained seats in the 2002 race. So yeah,
tough to know. Well, John, please call in on Wednesday, because we're going to be doing basically Newsday and going over this stuff. So maybe we'll take you and you give us an assessment of what happened.
All right, sounds good.
All right, bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Emma, take over for a second. I'll be back in a moment.
Okay, I will read some IMs and maybe take a solo call.
Whoa.
Margot from Mass. Walton's election is tomorrow. Yes, that is true. Tomorrow's election day, November 2nd. So everybody, everybody should go out to vote, but there are a bunch of ballot initiatives as well, including one in Minneapolis, I believe, that's about reimagining the police department, and a variety of other police-related ballot initiatives.
Yeah, they got rent control on it too. Check out my, we're going to put it up for everybody with the GP Jacob on that. And it's also interesting, like, to meta look at these elections, because while, you know, they're worth participating in and you should get what you can, sometimes, particularly in Minneapolis, the electorate is, the average age, again, 63 and 80% white. Probably not going to do the ultimate, you know, defund unless we end up with somehow a very progressive city council, and there's like a government restructuring thing that could give the mayor's office more power too. So, but check out that interview and for like a kind of look at how the far left should just be looking at these elections, and not like electoralism is dumb, because I mean it is dumb, but also you need to participate in it.
Right. It's dumb but necessary. Sammy Key, could Matt lead me to any JFK stuff by himself or other reliable peeps? I actually texted Matt this weekend about this because I was interested in, you know, Biden pushing back the release of those documents again.
Yeah, I'll give the two recommendations that I gave Emma, which is the Anthony Summers Not in Your Lifetime book is at least the best overall single volume look back at the JFK assassination. And also Death is Just Around the Corner is a podcast that did a 4 or 5 part series on the assassination that's early on, and if you look back in the archives, I'd highly recommend that.
Sam is back. That really did not take long.
Nope. Never does. Never does. I hesitate to play this. But this is interesting. Well, I mean, look. This guy was Everett Stern, supposedly part of the SBC thing, right? Didn't we look into that?
Mm.
And
yeah,
he is a Republican candidate
for Senate in Pennsylvania.
For Senate in Pennsylvania. He is the director of something called Tactical Rabbit, which apparently is a some type of like private intelligence service.
Well, and it's tactical because it's in the title.
And it's tactical.
It sounds like something that I think we should probably outlaw, but anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, agreed. He apparently uncovered the some element of the HSBC money laundering scandal, which ultimately led to a massive settlement, I think, or fine, like almost a $2 billion fine against HSBC in 2012. I think we were talking about stories where like HSBC had like places in Mexico where they actually like changed the teller window so that guys could come in with cash and fit the size suitcase they had through it. They like literally changed the but
who said banks aren't innovative?
Right. And so he was written up in Rolling Stone magazine for being one of the original guys. He was in the Netflix series. I mean, so he's been vetted. I think actually Taibbi wrote up a story about this guy. Matt Taibbi did in Rolling Stone. HSBC. So I don't know.
And let me just add on to the tactical rabbit thing. This is just from Wikipedia, but Stern found a tactical rabbit with the intention of exposing wrongdoing in financial and corporate institutions. So I certainly, if it's private intelligence against corporations, I might actually support that.
So he was running for Senate, still is, in Pennsylvania. I guess he's run against Toomey in the past. I mean, I don't know anything about his politics. I imagine if he's a Republican, I wouldn't like them. But apparently he was contacted by Michael Flynn and Michael Flynn's crew, Sidney Powell, a couple of the other people. And they said, you are really well situated to do the kind of work we want to be done because you're running for Senate and you're the head of Tactical Rabbit. And apparently what they wanted was to further the audits that are taking place. And they wanted blackmail material on different Republican politicians. And this guy claims he played along because he realized like there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
Played along, apparently notified the federal authorities at that time, and has all sorts of evidence that he has handed over to Mark Mazzotti at the New York Times. He handed it over just days ago. He's given it all to the feds too. Here is a press conference he had over the weekend.
So let's start as to when this event occurred and why we're here today. And the reason is really to break it down very simply that, I believe that General Flynn is committing treason against the United States. I believe his attorney, Ivan Reichland, Sidney Powell, and Giuliani are also committing treason against the United States. I understand that's a very, very strong word, but based on what I have seen and I've witnessed, I truly believe that is the case. General Flynn is controlling a group called the Patriot Caucus. Now, initially, when I first ran into this group, I thought they were the Patriots, which is different. The Patriots are more aligned with Trump, but the Patriot Caucus is different. They focus more on national security issues, except their national security version is that they believe they're living under a terrorist state with Biden as president. In fact, they don't believe Biden is president.
Now, here's the thing that's interesting about this. In addition to the fact that he's like almost like, well, let's be clear. He could be doing this for the publicity because he wants it in the Republican primary.
He definitely is. But,
well, I'm not quite convinced that gets you anywhere. I mean, he's trying to create a distinction between the Trumpistas, but Michael Flynn and I don't think this is not necessarily a winning recipe for a Republican primary. I don't think so, but maybe it gives him some name recognition.
Helpful.
Yeah, but possibly.
Maybe it's a wash.
Well, it's like maybe he's running for the publicity of the thing that he's trying to expose, as opposed to trying to expose something for the publicity of running.
Yeah.
Yes, and then I would also say that later in this press conference, he says that not only were they attempting to blackmail Republican politicians, they put on the table, we may have to engage in what they called domestic terrorism.
I mean, Flynn if you read like any sort of reporting on Flynn,
Mm-hmm.
like the Hastings stuff, like he's a psycho, and I absolutely. I mean, what was the stuff with the kidnapping plot? With
he was going
Turkish
to
national?
kidnap. He had been hired by the Turkish government to kidnap this this guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head now. He is a exiled religious leader who was doing some type of parochial charter schools or something. I mean, I don't know that this guy is particularly good, but
The Turkish government didn't like him. Yeah.
his name just escapes me at the moment. But the fascinating thing about this is that people forget Michael Flynn is, we consider him a joke. But
He knows things. He's been in rooms.
He's the top. He's one of the top counterintelligence, counterterrorism intelligence guys under McChrystal.
I mean,
which should probably speak to how we should view some of these counterintelligence people writ large.
When we talk about fascism as imperialism coming home to roost, and the sort of guys that we were empowered, I mean, it is scary. Like you look at the way France almost had a coup 50 years ago because a lot of the foreign military folks coming home said, "You guys betrayed us." This is the exact same thing.
Yep, exactly.
And it's the danger of elevating military personnel over civilian leadership, no matter how many times they're dunking on Trump.
I guess. But they weren't elevating Flynn.
They're not, but he's rogue because he's a psycho, as you say, but he's also indicative of larger shadowy operations and an understanding that he's not alone. He's not a rogue actor.
His brother is the current United States Army in the Pacific, commanding the army in the Pacific Ocean. Is the Pacific Ocean, is that a significant part of the world? I don't know.
He's also the #1 promulgator of the QAnon conspiracy. And who knows how much that feeds into all of this.
So Fethullah Gulen was the person he tried to
Gulen, right. Let's go to the phones, calling from a 973 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
That's right.
What's that?
Hello, is this me?
Yeah, it is you.
Oh, hey, what's up, man? It's my first time on your show. Just wanted to say if Friday was my birthday.
Friday
I was
was
wondering if I can get a show far.
Okay, and what's your name?
Angel from Jersey.
Angel from Jersey. And here you go.
Man, that feels so cool.
There you go. Anything else, or is that it? Are we done?
Yeah, I wanted to give you guys a call because I just moved from Hudson County, right? I just moved to Monmouth County, in Jersey, and elections are tomorrow, and I can't vote because I wasn't able to get my registration in on time. And so the previous owners of the house I bought were also, they just happened to be Democrats, but all of my neighbors they're all Republicans and Trump fans. They have flags everywhere. It's kind of funny.
Sounds kind of.
My wife and I.
You said you're in Middlesex?
Monmouth County.
Monmouth County. Okay.
Yeah, and it's just so weird, because I drive around and then I see the people that do there's a lot of big houses around here, right? There's a lot of moneyed people, I guess you could say, and they have these huge houses with lawns and stuff. And the same people that mow the lawns are the same people that support the Republicans. But it's I don't the cognitive dissonance there is just so mind blowing to me, because it's you're mowing the lawn to the person that's actually doing you no favors. You know what I mean? And you guys both support the same kind of ideals, except the person who's getting their lawn mowed is the one reaping all the benefits. And my thing is at what point does the person mowing the lawn have to get before they realize what's going on?
It's tough. I don't know what the breaking point of a situation like that is. I'm not sure what you mean. So you're saying that the people who mow the lawns in Monmouth County are also Trump supporters?
Yeah, they're also Trump supporters. A few of my neighbors actually have landscaping businesses. So I live on the one side of town where it's kind of getting it's kind of getting taken over by like the people that could afford houses right now. And like I could barely afford my house. Like I literally just bought it because of like FHA and like all these other like first time buyer homeowner programs, you know? So like a lot of the people that have been here for a while are moving out. But like a lot of the people on my side of town are like very like blue collar workers. And I just find the whole situation like weird in like kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of way, you know?
Well,
because,
it's also, I mean, the county contains parts of the Jersey Shore, right?
Say again?
The county contains parts of the Jersey Shore, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like right down the street is Steve Bright and like the beginning of like Long Branch and all that stuff.
Yeah, so that's also like, I mean, there's a huge disparity there when you drive down the Jersey Shore and you see these like massive vacation homes on the shore, and then most of that area outside of the shore homes is fairly like lower middle class. Yeah,
actually, one of the most interesting parts about this area is what was the name of the guy? Huckabee. I think there was like a story about him like a few years back where like he had an issue where he bought some like beachfront property or something like that, and like he got it through like some kind of negotiation that he did with like the town or something like that. Well, basically the same thing happens here, right? Like they have other houses that are like basically beachfront property have this like allotted space in front of the beach, which is like theirs. Like they can claim it as theirs. I think the workaround that they've gotten here is like only like a few of those like spots are public, and they're like
a lot of those homes are passed down from generation to generation to generation down there. Yeah.
I just, like I said, like I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks for picking up my call, guys.
Yeah, appreciate the call.
This whole situation is very weird.
Yeah, take it easy. Appreciate the call. Vote tomorrow, or if you haven't already voted.
I got too into talking about Jersey Shore.
There you go. I spent a little time at Lavalette back in the day. Call from a 239 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Jeff. I'm calling from Fort Myers, Florida.
Jeff from Fort Myers, Florida. What's on your mind? Quick.
Well, I just wanted to talk about the wealth tax real quick.
Please.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yep.
I am liberal. I'm also a tax attorney, but I do think that the wealth tax that's being put forward is it's not going to work. And I'm not trying to debate the morals of it. I think they're.
Do you think from a practical standpoint, what makes it so hard from a practical standpoint?
Well, number one, it's unconstitutional. I mean, Pollock and the direct tax issues that come up around it within the Constitution.
Let's put the constitutional question aside for the moment, because I would imagine that the people who have put it forward also have their theory about the constitutionality out of it. And, you know, it's not inconceivable to me that the Supreme Court would find any tax unconstitutional at this point. But putting that aside, from a practical standpoint, you seem to be implying that it wouldn't work.
Well, when we talk about tax policy, there is an issue around administrability.
I'm sorry, I can't. You broke up for a second. Say again.
I'm sorry. So when you talk about tax policy, there is an issue that you have to consider called administrability. Now, you could make the argument that says, "Hey, listen,
we're having
I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me a little bit better?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, I just for the conversation.
Cannot make out what you're saying. It's all jumbled.
Just sounds like bad service.
Call back if you want. I mean, I don't know about the constitutionality of it. I don't see why. I frankly don't think that there should be a constitutional problem about it. We do a wealth tax as it is now, based upon the wealth that you own in your house. It's called property tax, right? I mean, it's literally called a property tax. You don't sell your house on an annual basis, and it has an assessed value. Actually, stocks, obviously, much easier to assess the value than a home because it literally has a number associated with it. So from a practical standpoint, does not seem terribly difficult. Certainly, if you sell your stocks, you're supposed to provide with the government the purchase price and then the sales price. Seems quite easy on December 31st to send a statement of your stock holdings. And how do we assess the value of these stock holdings? Well, it's intrinsic in the number, in what the stock says it is. But I don't know. Maybe you
could do it with an AI bot. Just give the IRS AI; they could have it.
I mean, it doesn't seem terribly difficult. Constitutional questions aside, as a practical matter, it does not seem particularly difficult to make those assessments. Seems pretty straightforward to make. But I'm not a tax attorney. 937, calling from a 937.
Yeah, my name's Anthony. How are you guys doing?
Anthony, I am well. Where are you calling from?
Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio. What's on your mind?
So yeah, I just wanted to, because I was listening to you guys earlier talking about the supply chain shortages, and I just wanted to call in because I had read this really abominable Forbes article regarding the supply chain shortages from some dude named John Tammy. It's an incredibly smug article, infuriating to read. Mainly because he starts out the whole thing by saying, he's glad that everybody has read Wealth of Nations, but apparently no one understands it.
Right.
The thing that's infuriating about the article is, he doesn't even address the worker shortage whatsoever. He just sits there and puts all the blame on the government, saying, if they weren't putting in these mask mandates or vaccine mandates, then everyone would be able to work, completely disregarding the fact that a bunch of workers don't want to work because they don't want to get sick, etc.
What's stunning to me is that, how many weeks out are we from the reason why there's no workers is because we've been giving them unemployment checks and child tax credits, and now all of a sudden it's pivoting to the mask mandate. I mean, what is really shocking is where's the press to really sort of say, come on, give me an effing break here. I mean, you can figure this out. You can figure this out. The number of people who have not gotten vaccinated under these mandate regimes is infinitesimally small relative to the numbers. Some of them are louder than others, particularly the unions here in New York, but we'll see. I mean, we should be getting an assessment over the next couple of days as to how many people are not coming in and where they're going to be in a week. And the idea that people are resigning over these vaccinations, there's no doubt in my mind there are some people who are. But literally a handful, relative, and probably much less so than the people who resigned because they don't want to go into work and subject themselves to the chance of getting COVID.
It's low digits for cops, right? So what do you think is for other industries?
And you want to compare that to how many teachers resigned because there was no mask mandates or because there was no vaccine mandates? I mean, it's just
Well, that was the infuriating thing.
Yeah, it's infuriating.
Well, it's infuriating because, again, reading through the article, he picks and chooses what he wants to argue from. I've read Wealth of Nations. It's, a tiring book to sit there and read through. But there's, points in the book where Adam Smith literally calls for, unionization. There's literally points in the book where Adam Smith says that the government should be regulating the Scottish banking system in order to protect the Scottish economy. This dude is picking and choosing what he wants to pull from the book to affirm his argument.
Here's my advice to you.
Yeah.
Remember the name of that writer. Do not read him anymore. Or her.
Oh, it's definitely a him, and I don't intend to. I just read it, and then I remembered hearing you guys talking about the shortages last week and again this morning, and just thinking, wow, this person's an incredibly, incredibly dumb person. It's clearly a libertarian, right-wing libertarian. I'm sorry, Emma, for saying that every time someone brings it up, your eyes roll in the back of your head, but
no,
very clear that
because you're the one telling me about it derisively. No eye roll was elicited.
Well, here's the thing. This is a quick aside. I used to be one, and then I kept reading and educating myself and realizing, oh, that's a dumb philosophy. I'm not going to do that. this guy's clearly much older than I am, and I don't know how he hasn't gotten to that point yet.
Well, if somebody paid you to continue to disseminate that message, it would be much harder for you to assess that it was wrong.
Yeah, that's probably true, but I would like to think I'd have a little more integrity. But
well, you might, you do, but I think we've established something. It's right. That's right, Chief. Appreciate the call.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.
You too.
You too.
Is it a chromosome check if somebody like references Adam Smith and says, "You never read this"?
Final IM of the, phone call of the day. I suspect. Calling from a 312 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Tony from Chicago.
Tony from Chicago. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so you guys have been talking a lot about the Charlie Kirk thing that came up the other day, and I've been saying for a long time that we're like approaching the era of the militia, and I just thought it was crazy how that guy was going out saying, when do we get to use the guns? Not when do we need to use the guns, when do we have to use the guns? No, when do we get to use the guns? And that really freaked me out.
It is hard for me to figure out when that goes away, frankly. I mean, look, the only thing I would say this for context, in the 1980s, there was like 100 bombings maybe over the course of the 1980s. Or in the early part of the 80s.
I mean, the 70s and 60s.
Yeah, I grew up in the 80s, so I don't really remember that. I was a baby.
Yeah, no, I was in my, I graduated high school and college at that time. And, it was not that, it didn't feel like that. I was surprised to hear that. Let's put it that way. I think that it's quite possible we're going to see incidences, and we have, of violence like this. It could be more. I think the real problems that we have are more sort of long-term, to be honest with you. Like, when you look at the devolution,
like all these militias popping up everywhere isn't going to kind of boil over and eventually become like just a constant fixture in our lives and not this up and down that it kind of seems to happen every other generation?
I mean, I don't know what a constant fixture in our lives means. Like, if they are there the whole time, when you walk out your door, are you worried about them? I don't think that's the case. I do think long term, I do have some concerns about the devolution of our society, to be honest with you. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
And, I've been thinking about bringing on somebody on the fall of Rome. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, are you kidding me? We're done. We're done.
Yeah, the Byzantine Empire took a while to crumble, but
bases everywhere.
The thing is our capacity for self-annihilation has grown exponentially.
Oh yeah, and I would add this.
Freaks me out.
I think our country falls apart in other ways before the empire falls apart. To be honest with you,
I'm not saying that we're currently done. I'm saying that we are on the decline in terms of I don't know, world domination or legitimacy. Like I'm not.
Oh yeah, we've been on that decline since '63.
Yeah, it's just, and like thinking of that judge that got attacked and her family got murdered, and just like all of these threats that are coming out of the woodwork against politicians. Like I don't know, it's got me more freaked out than when Trump was around, because now it seems like people are just losing their damn minds.
Yeah, well, buckle up. Appreciate the call.
Thanks, guys. Love you.
Right.
Thanks.
There's no militias, according to this map I just looked at, in North Dakota, which is surprising.
Well, that's because that's where they expect them to be. I'm going to go to the IMs now, ladies and gentlemen, moving to that portion of the program. Deontological consequentialist. Rick Scott is correct. He wouldn't believe in wasting money in the Senate, paying his salary when he's such a waste of space. Mickey 7. Looks like Rick Scott doesn't want the government wasting money to help the poor because he still really wants to steal all of their tax dollars through his Medicare fraud scheme.
Yeah.
Little Mac. So is anyone going to ask why Republican voters are more enthusiastic? Could it perchance be due to the weakness displayed by Dem leadership during this negotiation process? I would say, honestly, no. I mean, well, certainly, let me put it this way.
You don't think a little bit?
Marginal, but probably the most is the swing.
What is the question is, in this instance, it's like, why? First of all, I think Republican voters are more enthusiastic. They are probably higher from the baseline than Democrats having nothing to do with what's going on. Because I think they're more, it's CRT, it's masks, it's vaccine, it's the Trump being stolen of the election. Do I think Democratic voters are more depressed than they would be? Their enthusiasm's more depressed than they would be was it not for the failure of this bill? I think marginally. But I think the problem is that too many voters who vote Democrats go to sleep. They wanted Joe Biden because they didn't want to be engaged in politics.
Also, the entire structure of our government, especially like with political corruption and now gerrymandering, but I mean, even the institutions in of themselves, like the Senate itself, it's undemocratic.
But I don't know if that leads to the to enthusiasm gap, right? There's two things that function in enthusiasm gap. One is one side's hyper enthusiasm, which I think the Republicans are very good at doing.
And losing power can do that to you. Look what happened to the Democrats in 2018.
Yes.
Exactly. That's why off-year elections always go this way. But the way that you would test this, and obviously we can't, is it, if the Democrats had passed, let's say, $3.5 trillion bill 2 weeks ago, would enthusiasm going into these elections be significantly higher for Democrats? And I am skeptical that it would be significantly higher.
Same.
I think there's no doubt.
The question can be: is it their weakness in general, as displayed throughout this infrastructure negotiation process?
Is what the weakness?
This is like another example of Democratic weakness.
It's not helping.
Right, but
it's not helping.
As a part of the larger picture of weakness.
But I just don't know how much the voters, outside of the idea of like maybe Biden isn't getting anything done, let me put it this way. I think if they had passed a $1.5 trillion bill or a $3.5 trillion bill 2 months ago, Democratic enthusiasm would be more or less at the same place. Not necessarily as it is now, but more or less. I just don't think outside of people who tune into a political show on a daily basis, that people are that engaged in the actual programs themselves. I think over time, it would make a difference in that it would change the relationship people have to the government. But in terms of the short-term stuff, I'm just not convinced that there's a huge swing. I think the reason why you do it is more for the long term, and then also really more for the actual just policy and the whole point of it. I think there are other factors that are depressing Democratic enthusiasm. Part of it is nothing's happening. Part of it is this is par for the course for Democrats.
Right.
And by Democratic voters, I mean.
Okay, so, all right. I mean, to me, I think it's when the structure of our government is designed to tamp down leftist progress, it makes sense that Democratic voters are a bit intrinsically less engaged on a year-to-year basis.
It's proving the opposite of what doing these things would have proved, for that the government can do something for you. It's, we gave the Democrats the Congress and the presidency, and they didn't do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but I'm not.
But I mean, overall, I think that there was some degree that this was going to happen because that's what happens when Democrats take power after a Republican has it.
Yeah. I think you need to look at some polling, and I haven't seen any recently, but when you look at like why the Republicans are ginned up in Virginia, it's education.
Yeah,
it's local education. Just because they've been able to make that an issue, we'll find out in 2 days. Laura, I laughed so much at the guy who wanted to stop procreation. You should have asked him how or who would stop elephants or lions from effing. Quimby from Colorado just got some majority roast. Not a huge fan of medium roast, but if it tastes half as good as it smells, and their prices are amazing. That's true. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. It's a great coffee. Get the majority roast, majority blend. Hitchens Ghost. There's a must-read book on linguistic trickery and how it applies to demonetization of live broadcasts, such as those on YouTube and other platforms. It was written by a great author named C.B. Dietrich.
I don't get it.
CBD trick. It's a CBD trick.
Good one.
CBD.
God.
Hitchens Ghost. After being involved with the Kellogg strike in Omaha, I've realized that action and involvement can make a difference. So I finally taken the most important step, which is to become a contributing member of the Majority Report. World Peace Solved got an extra shofar to help in satisfying my overactive sense of self-importance. Of course, thank you for that. Left-hand stranger. As of Q2 2021, Peacock had 54 million users. Peacock generated $100 million in revenue in Q4 in 2020. Leading into the Tokyo Olympics, Peacock gained 9 million subscriptions. I mean, you got to do what you got to do, but that's a lot of people who could stumble onto the show. No.
Yeah.
No. You'd think. But first of all, I question those numbers. But I don't know. I have no inside information. But you'd think, right?
Yeah.
Think.
But people, email us. If you ever watch the show on Peacock, email us. Right? I mean, presumably, we've been off now for a week or two. If people really developed a habit, they'd be watching the show at one point.
Yeah.
Even those numbers, like 52 million users and then $100 million revenue, that's like
That's not good.
That's not very good.
Well, it's free to sign up.
And that's ad revenue. I mean, look,
I didn't watch a second of the Olympics.
Billions of dollars invested in that. Anyways, this is all public info. Okay, IDK. Do you think that a wealthy 38-year-old guy moving in together with a 19-year-old who was living in the slums within a week of their meeting on a long vacation abroad is then getting married not too long afterwards is creepy?
Who is that? Okay. Oh.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm in.
I don't want to
Don't I am
traffic in that. Yeah.
Between the 101 and the 5. Wire season 2 at the ports over here. Bronze Age collapse season 2 over here. Wayne Kerr. Already read that stuff. You District
2 for 1.
District Draboni. Okay, we'll do 4 more of these. If we had a functional government that cared about essential workers, they'd be able to pass a temporary pay coverage for these port truckers. But instead, the supply chain will suffer and probably lose more money than this would have cost simply to cover the lost wages from waiting at the port. Indeed. I would be surprised if we don't eventually get something like that. Colonel Burner. Sometimes I think there's a little bit of sour grapes with Greenwald. He knows a show like yours hosted by him would be effing lame. I don't think it's that simple. Patiently waiting for Charlie Kirk to claim that the militia guy was actually an Antifa plant. Thrin. So upset about the paternity leave being cut. My pro-family values dad implied things were better when maternity leave was directly subsidized by the husband 70 or 8 years ago. He also says it's not helped Europe with their family values. Having a daughter did not make him a feminist. Left is best.
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's annoying.
Walrus. Love the show. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Warren from Toronto. Hi, Mark Crew. Can I please get a belated shofar for my birthday yesterday? I started watching the show daily during the Dem primary. Watch your clips long before then. You're my favorite part of any media diet. Can't wait for the live show. And the final I am of the day. Caller needs to understand that a lot of white conservative voters are voting on race, not economics or policy. It's about upholding the white power class. Matt, Emma, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light's shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made.